All right. First rule of this channel, we do not talk about this channel. Second rule of the channel, this is not legal advice. So, what I was thinking about was projected bell cows for the 2024 season for fantasy football. And in this case, when I was doing a little bit of research, I think we're going to be in line for about like 4 to 6 guys that we can actually say are going to take over their backfields. So, like when we look at last year, one of the big league winners and where we were wrong and where we were right, we got Kyron Williams as the guy that probably was the big unicorn of the draft when it comes to value versus what the cost was to get him. He went undrafted in most leagues, and then he's getting there up there like 95-80% of snap share. And that's the biggest thing. Obviously, those who have listened to the channel for a while, I'll say that opportunity is still the king of fantasy football. So from a running back perspective, that opportunity automatically gets the two things that we want: receiving work, design receiving work, and then goal line usage or red zone usage, so they can get touchdowns. So when we're looking at the projections for next year, the guys that are going to get a bulk of the work, that we can guarantee are going to be the guys that aren't going to come off the field, are going to be the guys that we can know are going to project towards, or shouldn't say no, are going to project further. We can predict are going to be the guys that end up finishing the season with those either high value seasons or those legendary type seasons, at the end of the year. And that's what we're looking at when it comes to just the idea of bell cows. How many guys have competition in their backfield for those opportunities? And right now, we kind of know some of those guys to start off with going into the season. So the other thing that I want to talk about is the rookies, because we're in the pre rookie draft for the NFL. Is I've been starting to break down some of these running backs. I like a lot of the running backs. The first video I did on this channel was whether or not the running back position was undervalued, and I said it's not. Part of what goes on is I like a lot of the prospects. I think they are very flawed in the ways that they're flawed, and they're very good at the things that they do well. So the true bell cows, the guys from a fantasy perspective that we care about, are the guys that are going to get that design receiving work, and they're also going to get the red zone opportunities, and those are going to be relatively limited. The rest of the guys from a fantasy perspective are only going to damage the prospects of guys that we would like to take in the draft. So again, it's going to be where these guys land and what's going to go on those backfields, because a guy who projects as a bell cow can go to a backfield that has a lot of opportunities, and it kind of hurts both guys from fantasy perspective. And then a very flawed prospect can go to a situation where there's limited opportunities, and then he could actually project up almost to short of being a bell cow just because of the opportunity he's going to get. So like that's what we're looking at is after the draft, where these guys go relative to the guys that we can look at now and see what they're what we can kind of project that they're going to be if none of these running backs go to a place that we care about. So in this case, obviously the first guy we're going to talk about is Christian McCaffrey. I don't necessarily think that he's the biggest thing with him is he's going to be 28 going into next season. It doesn't mean that at 28 he can't have a very high productive fantasy season. Remember that 26 is the age apex for running backs in fantasy. 28 can still be very productive, but from a fantasy perspective, it doesn't matter if there's an age-related decline or there's an injury. If I choose right by avoiding him, it's the same outcome, right? So the only way I get burned by taking a guy like Christian McCaffrey in this case is I pull him up so I'm not staring into the ether. The only way that it hurts me to or the only way that I get hurt by taking or not taking Christian McCaffrey is if he has one of those high upside legendary type seasons. And right now, the 49ers wouldn't project to necessarily go out and get anybody in the draft. They have Jordan Mason. Like, I expect that if anything, his role will slightly increase. And Elijah Mitchell, who's been injury prone, he can kind of be that speed guy. Mason can kind of be that pounder. I don't necessarily think they're going to go out and spend any great capital on anything because, again, they just lost the Super Bowl. They don't really need to do anything crazy at the running back position. They just kind of have to hope that they can milk a season more out of Christian McCaffrey at that high elite unicorn type range. And again, I don't necessarily think that McCaffrey's going to take a step back from a production or efficiency standpoint, but the metrics are saying that he will. That's the best way to look at it. And I would tend to downgrade him just because, like, I'm going to be risk averse with the pick that I should be using to take him. So if you're in a snake draft, you're probably looking at like the 101 to maybe the 105. you would probably be able to land a Christian McCaffrey, and 105 would probably be a little high in a auction league. I would guess McCaffrey's going to be in that like $50 to $70 type range in redraft. And then if you have him in a dynasty type league, he's at the edge of what he's going to be valued anymore, because that 1 year, that could happen this year, that steep drop off, and then he's not worth anything to anybody. But again, like that's where I would necessarily see Christian McCaffrey, going into this year. He probably should still be in the conversation for 101, but there's going to be a little bit more risk involved than there wasn't even last year based off of his position and his age. Not so much because of the competition. So moving on, the next guy I have written down, and this is the guy that I would probably have as the 101 in drafts. It would be Breece Hall, primarily because of the age. The situation is good because they've upgraded the offensive line. There isn't a lot of challenge for opportunity in this one. The biggest thing I'd be looking at, they did let Israel Abanikanda have a little bit of run last year. He didn't do very much. That would be the one thing that I would say going into next year, that I would either expect that the Jets don't draft anybody. So if they do draft somebody, it probably downgrades Abanikanda more than anything. Probably doesn't really affect Breece Hall. They might, try and limit Breece's opportunities just so he doesn't get those like low efficiency type opportunities that we don't really care about from a fantasy standpoint. The other news, like if they don't bring anybody in, then that just means they're probably going to stick with Breece and Abanikanda. Like I said, I don't see there being a big change whether or not they bring anybody in or not in the draft to Breece's overall value going into this year. And I would have him slightly higher than McCaffrey because of the age. But again, like I just don't see any way that his overall value or opportunity is going to go down regardless of what goes on. I already talked about Kieran Williams a little bit to start this off as I hunt down the Rams. And again, you can already see that like Ronnie Rivers, Zach Evans, who they gave a little bit of run to, he didn't really do much. Ronnie Rivers, undrafted guy, was on the practice squad going up and down before he got injured. I wouldn't surprise me if he stays in that role next year. I would expect that the Rams will go do something, because running Kieran Williams at that like 90-80% clip, especially because he is undersized, would be kind of something that I would be surprised about. But him getting in that 80% snaps and getting a majority of the opportunity in the valuable range would be something that I would expect to go ahead forward regardless. So I don't expect the Rams to spend capital on the position in the draft. And if they want to go out there and kind of take the entire load off of Kyron Williams, I would expect that, but they would probably know what they're spending. So the higher value guys in the draft, and we're talking like, rounds 1 through 4, basically, I don't see them spending a pick on to replace a guy that performed as well as he did, especially after he came back from the injury. So going on. And then the last guy that I would put in the pure bell cows going into next year was Jonathan Taylor. And this is a little weird because I don't think the opportunity or the lack of opportunity or the reduction in opportunity for Jonathan Taylor is going to happen because of the backfield, Trey Sermon, Eric Cole. I don't see that's going to happen. It's going to probably come down to Anthony Richardson taking away some of the opportunity of Jonathan Taylor. So they paid him. He's under the age apex. I think the opportunity is going to be there. It's mostly how that offense is going to function. Anthony Richardson probably will vulture some rushing touchdowns away from Jonathan Taylor. I think that's something that we can agree on without it being a hot take whatsoever. It just becomes like the biggest thing that's going to hurt Jonathan Taylor is if Anthony Richardson does not use him in the passing game. That's the biggest thing that's going to happen with him overall. And again, because Anthony Richardson may end up being a little bit nimbly-bimbly, that's going to cut your opportunities in the game regardless of whether or not they go to Jonathan Taylor. The clock's just going to keep running. They did play fast last year with Anthony Richardson, with Gardner Minshew, so that's something to be looking forward to. But that would be the biggest thing that I would think would hurt his overall opportunity. But these are the only 4 real projected bell cows. The other one that I kind of want to talk about that I would put in this category as I hunt down the Buccaneers is Rachaad White. And right now he is like going to be like well undervalued. I think on ESPN, I'm looking it up right now, they have Rachaad White listed as like the running back 14. I would be really surprised if he stays there, especially because of the fact that like I could see Rachaad White, if that at that value, is going to get hype trained up a lot. Because that's outside of running back one land, let alone like where he should be as like a top 5 guy, in my opinion. So again, under the age apex, obviously he's going to get that receiving work. You know, he had 64 receptions last year on 70 targets. I don't see that necessarily changing. His rushing work got better as the season went on. We're getting Baker May back. We're going to have stability in the backfield. They re-signed Chase Edmonds, and the only other guy that I maybe would see kind of maybe cutting into the opportunity is Sean Tucker, but they gave him a run early in the season, and then he was not, not a thing. So even if he makes the roster, I just don't see him cutting into Rachaad White. The biggest reason why I would have Rachaad White ranked it as number 5 overall is this would be a situation where I would see that they would bring in a guy to either complement Rachaad White, or do some of the other take some of the work off of him, so he's not in that massive usage range. But surprisingly, his snap share was only about 70% for most of the year, because they just don't put him in the field where he's not going to get the football. So that's something good, because what's his face? Chase Edmonds just wasn't getting a huge amount of opportunity when he was on the field. So right now we can look at Chase Edmonds coming back to the role that he had last year, Rachaad White having basically the role that he had last year. And unless there's a big shakeup where they bring someone in the draft to basically make Rachaad White a 50-50 type guy, he would fall into that bell count range. But right now I would kind of say that it's a coin flip of whether or not the Buccaneers will spend on a guy to replace Rachaad White. So the other guys to talk about and to moving on, and this is kind of unique because even though I do think that Derrick Henry does project to be a bell cow, Keaton Mitchell is going to be probably not a factor this year for most of from a fantasy perspective for most of the year because of the knee. And then Justice Hill just wasn't very efficient. Those are the two guys that we would be looking at overall. So Derrick Henry, he is over the age apex at 30. He's kind of he's a freak. So I'm not as concerned with the age apex for him. It's going to be the situation that he's in. Lamar Jackson is probably going to still vulture some touchdowns, just like Anthony Richardson will from Jonathan Taylor. But the other thing is he's just probably not going to be a factor in the receiving game. He's never really been that big of a factor in the receiving game. And then he's going to an offense that doesn't usually utilize the running back in the receiving game. And if they are going to use a running back in the receiving game, it may not end up being him. It may end up being like Justice Hill at this point, and then maybe in the later in the season, Keaton Mitchell. So even though overall I would say that from an opportunity standpoint, Derrick Henry is going projects to be a bell cow. From an efficiency standpoint, he's not going to be one next year, more than likely. But he's somebody that we'd have to talk about in this range when it comes to just pure opportunity. And then there's a few other guys that to talk about in this bell cow type range right now. One of them would it would be Gus Edwards. There isn't any other opportunity that I would see in the Chargers backfield for him. Josh Kelly, Isaiah Spiller were not necessarily good last year with Eckler gone. So right now, like I could definitely see that Gus Edwards would fall into that 70-80% range of usage. And then if he's going to be the guy primarily falling in the end zone, like there's a lot of stuff to like here. And again, you can see this the other day, like he was called the bell cow. I don't care about coach speak or GM speak. What I am talking about is I would be really, really surprised if they don't go out and they spend like a good pick on a more dynamic running back than Gus Edwards. But from a fantasy perspective, if there isn't a lot of movement, then Gus Edwards is going to just jump up into the conversation for bell cow. And now we're just going to evaluate, how much he's undervalued relative to where he should go based off of opportunity. And that's the biggest thing overall is like, if the opportunity is going to be there and the cost for me to find out is low enough, then I'm going to pull the trigger on that every day of the week. And then I can, at the very least, like throw a guy away that's not going to cost me anything. So Gus Edwards would be a prime candidate to go like, hey, everything's trending in the direction of him getting all the opportunity and he's going to be relatively cheap. I don't even know where he's listed. I can go look right now, see if I can hunt down Gus Edwards. He's ranked as the 36th running back on ESPN, which I think is primarily the same thing I'm thinking of is that they're going to bring in a guy in the draft to compete for opportunity. So let's see. Moving on from that, and I have James Cook, and this is another interesting one that this was the main reason why I thought to do this video. So Damian Harris retired. I think it was yesterday actually. But that says 2 hours ago he did retire. This is what made me think of the video because this is going to like disproportionately affect James Cook. Like right now he's a bell cow. there isn't anybody else in the Buffalo offense that I would really project as being, a guy that's going to take significant touches away from James Cook. Like the guy that I'm most worried about taking away opportunity from James Cook in Buffalo right now is the quarterback position. I'm not worried about the running back position. So this would vault James Cook all the way up into, that first tier of guys that we talked about: CMC, Brees, Kyron Williams, JT, and probably Rashad White, because there's anybody else there. So now, as long as there's not a significant enough pick in the draft to drop James Cook, he's got to be looked at in that bell cow type position. So the range of outcome to say next year, right now, that James Cook could finish as the RB1 overall, it's there. Like, just because of the retirement of Damian Harris and potentially taking away, some of the opportunity in that backfield. If they go out and they re-sign, an Uncle Lenny or Latavius Murray, hey, maybe that would change things a little bit. I went and looked it up beforehand. I didn't see Latavius Murray having been signed yet. It does say that on Sleeper that he is projected for 29 fantasy points. And maybe Ty Johnson, who has not been particularly good, did have a little bit of run at the end of the season. I could maybe see him staying in that 20% type range if that's the backfield shakeout, James Cook and Ty Johnson. But overall, James Cook, who finished the season like relatively strong by the end, he's going to get, that work that we want, the receiving work. And then as long as he can get that goal line work to a certain extent to push his overall, touchdowns up, that's about all we care about. So like he's a guy that I would be looking at potentially maintaining his undervalued status coming out of the draft. And then the last guy that I have written down today is Devin Singletary. Him coming over, he hits a lot of the things that we like from a fantasy perspective. He's going to a new team. He did perform well at the end of last year. There's a lack of competition in his backfield. Maybe I'm a little worried about Eric Gray. They did give him a little bit of run at certain points in the season. Maybe he's going to step in. He's got some of the better attributes that you would look at as being a bell cow, but he's not necessarily, from a talent perspective, somebody I'm really worried about. I could definitely see the Giants going out there and spending like high-end capital on another running back to replace Saquon. But as of right now, like, this is why I have him. Like, I'm curious to see what they spend, what capital they spend to bring in another running back in this situation for the Giants, but that can't be underplayed. And then even though I said I was done, there's a couple guys I'm going to talk about them tomorrow, the next day when I get around to finishing this. One of them is Kamara. He's had points where he's been a bell cow. There's other points where he's been an efficiency back. He's over 29, or he'll be 29 when the season starts. I'll talk a little bit more about him tomorrow. The other guy that would maybe fall into this category, and again, this is mostly based off of if things don't change now, what we're looking at in the future is maybe James Conner, who did have a little bit of run at the end of the season, being that bell cow. He's going to be 29 going into the season. I definitely think that DeMarcado and Michael Carter might cut into that, and that's if they don't spend any capital on it. But I will talk about these guys tomorrow if you're curious where they are. Everybody else, there's a reason why they're not in this tier of what I have 9 guys that we talked about today. But overall, those are the guys I'm looking at projecting to be bell cows before the draft. And coming out of the draft, I will definitely say that I probably would be leaning to, at the low end, 4 guys, maybe 5 or 6 at tops of ending up being bell cows. And then if they're not projected to be in the first round of the draft, those are guys that I would overvalue going into my draft to get these guys. So, if a Rashad White is listed as, running back 14 and he's projected to go in third, I would spend a second round pick to go get that guy because of how limited upsides they're going to be for guys to finish as high-end running back ones. So that's basically the idea behind the video today. And we'll talk about the lower end RB1s in the next couple days that have still have the range of outcomes to finish as the RB1 overall, those legendary type seasons, but there's some asterisks next to, and then later on we'll talk about like those high end RB2s and then those low end RB2s and then the split backfields that we kind of just got to get lucky on to have them return on investment. So anyway, I'll see you guys later.